Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Spar&Brawl. Hope you're having a decent day. As always, I'm joined by my co-host Sam, who's going to start by setting up this story and then proceeding with his main points. So, Sam, go ahead.
Hi everyone. So we did a story a couple of days ago, I believe, that was about OPEC plus spat, as it's been described, between the Emirati and Saudi officials over the oil prices in the future and oil production in the future. And that sort of piqued my interest in the ongoing relationship between Saudi government and Emirati government, because I haven't been following it as such as a specific issue. I have been following it like in Syria, what's going on, in Yemen, what's going on, but not the relationship between the two specifically. And it's quite interesting, the evolution it's been undergoing over the course of the last 10 years. So I thought we do a video about this, and we highlight some of the issues that has led to cooperations in the past, and more recently, very recently, in the last 2 years or so, conflict and disunity between the two countries. Any questions before I
No,
just
brilliant.
jump
That
in?
sounds really good. Go ahead.
All right. So let's just to give a larger context of the thing. First of all, we're going to put some links in the description of really good articles about this, which I'm going to comment on. But excuse me. So these following the Iranian Revolution in 1979, you had this Gulf Cooperation Council set up, which was largely set up in 1981 to counter the potential export of Iranian revolution or revolutionary or fight the revolutionary forces within Arabic countries, and in a larger extent to be something like EU is in the future, in the very long-term future. And in the last 20 years, there has been a common market established among 6 countries, including UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, and Oman, Bahrain. So you had this setup. You have this setup, right? But there has always been differences within this setup. And recently, interestingly, you've seen divergence of interest within this setup a lot. So you had the Saudi Qatari issues and conflicts, and now increasingly we are seeing Saudi UAE difficulties and issues. So let's talk about specifically the issues. So there is this Syrian problem that UAE and Saudis have. And the Syrian thing is that since 2018, basically, UAE has accepted the Russian position that the Assadi state or Assadi government, they're gonna stay in power. And they may reform, and they've introduced elections, blah blah blah. But largely the structure of a state is going to stay the same. So UAE has accepted that. They have accepted that Assad should be brought back to the Arab League, and that was a big win for Assad, by the way. So UAE there is with the Russians there, right, and has accepted Assad. Saudis, they're not actively, according to most reports, are not funding anti-Assadi forces anymore, but they're not off that because they're very much against Assad being welcomed back into the Arab League. And that's partially because of the fact that the leadership is more anti-Assad, but it's also partially because the population in Saudi Arabia are apparently far more anti-Assad. To be honest, I couldn't fact check this specifically, but the reports I read, which it's Financial Times, it's TRT, which is backed by the Turkish government and all that, all of them seem to suggest that the Saudi population is very much anti-Assad. And that makes sense because Assad represents a minority Shia sect. So a Shia sect, which is a minority within the Shia which already is a minority within Islamic religion. And Saudi Arabia is known for its, hardcore education system and Sunni and Wahhabi thing. So it makes sense that, they're far more anti-Assadist. So that's one major issue you have there. Then you have Yemen, in which they were in line for a very long time. But then recently, again, like last 2 years, UAE has shifted towards supporting this southern independent movement. And Yemen was very recently two different countries, northern Yemen and southern Yemen. So because south of Yemen are Sunnis, west of Yemen are in the mountains, they're like Shia tribes. Again, a minority sect within the Shia within the Shia minority. It's like it's quite funny. But so they're supporting the southern independent forces, while the Saudi government is still backing the UN supported Hadi government from years. Hadi's dead now. I don't know whose government it is now, but yeah, from many years ago, who's has very little. Has right now. I think they are the underdogs in the fight right now, and UAE's main focus seems to be like just a stabilizing shipping, a stabilizing trade, while for Saudis, well, obviously there is a whole security thing to you can for them in terms of security issues, they can't allow a Shia state in their view to exist right next to their border. So I'm not justifying it, by the way. I'm just stating their position. So the interest shifted there as well. So they're diverging there. Then you have Qatar. With Qatar, it's the kind of reverse of these, because in these two kind of UAE, in my view, from my perspective, comes across as the more rational player. In the Qatari situation, it's the opposite. It's that, yes, Saudi is basically Qatar was, according to reports, was very surprised at how fast the relationship was basically repaired and was dragging its feet. I don't know how. I tried to Google that, but I couldn't find anything. But Qatar was dragging its feet in renormalizing relationship with Qatar, and that I didn't see too many explanations of that, but I think that's very that's just explain itself, because Qatar is the biggest rival of UAE in terms of economic wise and in terms of tourism hub and transportation hub. Then you have probably that's the biggest one, or one of the biggest one, Palestine issue, which I was very surprised that I didn't know that within Saudi government and within Saudi princes, as well as the public opinion, is far more against any reconciliation with Israelis, while UAE are just general public. I have no idea about general public, but I would assume they don't care too much about it. And the leadership are far, far more positive about it. You even had very recently, about 6 months ago, you had a Saudi prince openly attacking UAE officials in a summit in Bahrain. So Palestine is an issue that I would think Saudi officials feel if they completely abandon, at least the old guard feels if they completely abandon, they will have revolutions at their hand. So maybe that's why. But so that's another point where they really differ. Then you have this obvious recent example of OPEC Plus, where the Emiratis want to increase their production output, but Saudis are opposing that. You have Saudis putting in tariffs on UAE and new taxes on UAE imported goods, which is like they're basically reducing their level of cooperation, which has been increasing as a part of that framework of the 6 countries that I mentioned. It has been getting more free and free, but it's been this is like last month or so. And then, like last week, I think it was a day before the OPEC spat came out, they put in travel restrictions for people coming from UAE due to COVID sanction. That was the explanation they gave, but a lot of people were saying that it's not that. That's just a whitewashing. That's just the excuse. Riyadh has introduced policies that nowadays international companies must have offices in Riyadh itself by 2024, I think, which is clearly aimed at Dubai. Dubai is Dubai is like the Singapore of, let's say, Middle East, in terms of like it's very laissez-faire, and everybody would prefer to have their offices there for tax purposes, for ease of doing business purposes. So this is a major threat against all the businesses that are basically are based in UAE but do business in Saudi Arabia. But now we get into, I think, do you have any questions about these? Are the major points of contention?
No, I mean,
between the two countries. Now I want to get to the why.
So I agree. Like, I just want to say, like, I agree with so many of them. The one about travel restriction, COVID, I can believe that if it's because of COVID, because UAE needs tourists, so it's very open to people coming. Saudi Arabia is not that dependent on tourists; it's letting less people come. I can see those travel restrictions from UAE to Saudi being that. The other one that you mentioned, very interesting, Saudi's asking businesses to move their HQ. And I just want to add that I guess UAE also has the advantage on top of the ones that you said, is that foreign workers who occupy most of these corporate jobs, they would most likely prefer to be in Dubai rather than Saudi Arabia. Anyway, so they just have that small advantage going on. The other thing, and you checked it as well, and I read in the article that you shared as well, that the population in Saudi Arabia also, don't like the Assad regime too much. And I mean, that's bearing influence on the government's decisions. I mean, sometimes I also worry of, I'm not too sure when they say, oh, the population also feels like that, are they sure? But yeah, you're right. It's being said in a lot of places. And
yeah, it's said by a couple of sources, first of all. Second of all, I would say, even if we don't accept that, I would accept definitely that the Saudi government is more responsive to Saudi population than UAE government is to UAE population, because UAE population is far more, UAE economy, it seems to me, far more dependent on. Although I did take a look at the economy of Saudi Arabia as well, and Saudi Arabia economy is it's worse for the normal people, first of all. So I think that automatically makes you more responsive.
I mean, they probably have such a bigger population of normal,
quote
unquote, normal people.
Exactly. They have 34 plus million population. So they are they are more responsive to populations.
Mm-hmm.
And, there are all these nobody knows, because like there is like 20% of Saudi Arabia which is Shia, and nobody has any like demographic data from that area. So you have to be very hesitant. I doubt most people, most Saudis outside of like major cities and stuff, they really care about Assad or Palestine Palestine, by the way, before all the leftists go on about the Palestinian cause. Like most people, most places across the fucking
worry
world,
about your own issues.
Food, water.
But otherwise,
housing.
Very 100% agree with all of these points of contention that you've laid out. So continue with the why as you were.
Why the recent developments? Why I said the framework that emerged was sort of the increasing unity among the Arab countries came about as a part of like a response to the Iranian revolution. That was a sort of a trend, although that was a trend that was a very contradictory trend. So you would have people like Saddam become very close and then suddenly attack, like being funded by Kuwait and then attacking Kuwait. And so it always been a problematic framework, very fractious. But Following the Arab Spring, UAE and Saudi Arabia became very close in their counter-revolutionary agenda. And that brought them very close in Yemen, in Syria, in many other places. In Libya, in these places, they were close to each other. As time has developed, I would say, again, now, now Saudis are far more focused on, let's say, global power politics, and UAE has far more business interest as a sort of not a city-state, as a 6, 7 city-states, 7 Emirates, or tiny states or whatever. So, naturally the interests are shifting. For example, in Syria, that's, by the way, that's why I put it this way, because from these examples, from Syria, you see that obviously UAE has no, UAE, it seems to be acting in its economic interest first and foremost, in terms of we want to do
what I'm
deals
getting
with them.
out of it.
We want, so we want to do that deal with them. While Saudis, even though they might benefit economically if they reconcile with Assad, they have bigger games that they're playing against Russia, against Iran, against all that. And UAE has been ambitious, but I don't think they're deluded that to thinking they can take on Iran or they can become although their flirtation with nuclear power may have hinted at becoming a regional power, but I doubt they are that deluded. You look at then Yemen, again, reports say they're mainly focused on shipping and trade. You look at Qatar, again, if you want to go, if you wanted to have an ideological framework, they should in Qatar be happy to reconcile with Qatar as ASAP as well, like Syria, right? In fact, Qatar is much friendlier than Syria largely. But no, they drag their feet. Why? Because Qatar is a major rival. Qatar Airways is the biggest rival of Emirates Airways.
I mean, they're literally, they're competing in so many ways. It's like insane. I mean, they're so similar and they're competing exactly for the same thing.
Exactly the same.
Bring the biggest corporations, the biggest events.
That gets to the other. So we had this whole Arab Spring counter-revolutionary thing, and then situation stabilizes and interests diverge. At the same time, you have this Saudi push for increased development and diversification from oil, and UAE, I think, is already only dependent on oil. 30% of UAE economy is dependent on oil, while Saudi is around 60%. So, and they're building these major tourist hubs, or in this program, they have 2030 Saudi vision or whatever it's called, where they keep promoting, although they are very short on details. I'll get to that. They are planning all these major cities to become the transportation hub of the Middle East, sort of what Iran was. No, Saudi is planning to do that to replace UAE, and that's what is causing the friction. And that's what, by the way, Iran was planning during Shah's time, and was, in a way, that, because it's between China, India, and Europe, this is like the key. If you can become a transportation hub, it's very financially and a financial hub, by the way. They're trying to become more laissez-faire. So Saudis are getting into the competition that you described between Qatar and UAE, and a lot of, for example, economic people were saying that Saudis are wise to strengthen their relationship with Qatar and Oman right now, because UAE, they are the weaker ones, obviously. I think Qatari Airways is the one that they challenge UAE the most in terms of finance and tourism. UAE dominates by far. So these seems to be the wise, and the public opinion in the Saudi Arabia, which we discussed, and in the larger Arab world, which Saudi Arabia cares about. Saudi Arabia cares about what people think in Pakistan, what people think in Egypt, Sudan, that type of thing. Not UAE, less so. Not that they don't, by the way. All of this is a spectrum. I'm sure there are people within the UAE that care a lot about the Palestinian cause, that hate the Assad government, that care about the, but it's all a spectrum. And for example, this is a very anecdotal and personal example. But from what I understand, like the UAE crown prince who's in charge, his father has had problems, and the crown prince of UAE who's been in charge for I think about 6 years now, Mohammed MBZ, Mohammed Ben, I don't know, yeah. MBZ, the guy they
And
used to say
Zayed, I
was
think his
mentor.
last name is Zayed. I think so.
Ben Zayed, or the guy who they used to say was the mentor and the point man of Mohammed bin Salman. I believe he has one wife, and he has a largely liberal lifestyle, like in his personal life. While most, like from what I understand from like MBS and stuff, they don't live like that. Like, it's just general. I have a feeling this was just a side note on their personal thing, but I do think if you're in UAE, you tend to be more laissez-faire, more international, and more economic focused. While Saudis, they have bigger games, they have ideological stuff, all of that is going on. So there is all of that. And then so like the Saudi population and these populations are more conservatives, as I said. Then I was gonna get into a bit of a sort of my personal take on. I know I gave my personal take.
I have a question for you. Last time when we covered the OPEC story, I said that how this former OPEC researcher, he said that he believes that the reason that the UAE isn't agreeing with Saudi on like the oil framework is 60 to 70% political. And I said that I don't think so. And then you said you can differentiate political economy, and it kind of went down this. But my point was that the UAE isn't saying no to Saudi here and saying, no, Saudi, I won't agree with you based on ideological reasons. It's just clearly not in their interest, in their economic interest right now to align with these positions of Saudi. So I wanted to see what you make of that. Would you revisit anything that you want to say, or how you would comment about that?
Yeah, well, your economy, your politics is a reflection of your economy and vice versa, I think. Yeah. So I don't like ideologically. I don't like, but I definitely.
But you use that word. You literally used that word like 5 minutes ago.
What did I say?
Yeah, say that it's not ideological, but it's their economic interest. Oh. I'm pretty sure. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm wrong. If I did that,
I think you did anyway.
They're more economically focused, I think I said, but that's what I meant anyway. I was wrong to say that, but they are. I would definitely say I think UAE knew that, and I think the reports are that the spat is likely to be over in a few days. But the UAE knows that it's not gonna win this economic battle, and I don't think they're gonna leave OPEC. I doubt.
No, they're not going to leave OPEC, but I mean, they could get a little.
I think it reflected
in their production.
Reflected the pushback, general pushback against Saudi dominance. It wasn't just about oil prices, but it was a point of contention. But yeah, I do sometimes use the word, but generally speaking, it's everything I say I mean on a spectrum. By everybody like ideology is the combination of politics and economy. Yeah. That's all I meant.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I just want to add one thing. This is just to go, talking about the business and stuff. And the UAE is also just trying to become even more business friendly. For instance, until very recently, if a foreigner wanted to set up a business in Dubai, they had to partner up with someone from the UAE, an Emirati. Now they've removed this, and they're in the process of removing this. So they're just trying to welcome as much more business, I guess, just more and more business. So that's why when you said Saudi are also opening more ports and stuff, for a second I thought you're talking about UAE, because that's been UAE's game plan as well. Ports, finance, business, tourism.
I don't understand this ranking and stuff, because like, for example, in Iran, foreign nationals can own and run 100% their own business, their own
Yeah, no,
stuff.
this is how
But it's
Dubai, the
considered
UAE.
one of the worst places, ease of business,
Yeah.
awful. Although
But
it's disconnected
and
from
sorry,
it.
this I wanted to
Yeah,
add one more thing. When you
how do
compare
they?
like UAE to Saudi, UAE is just such a strange country in a sense, I would say, or different country, just because of how small portion of their population are locals. It's like something around 20%. I believe Saudis have a much bigger. So yeah, I just wanted to bring in that, like,
Yeah, yeah,
you're saying the
exactly.
Saudis have to respond more to their population,
Popular.
which makes sense. The UAE
But
has such
I
a
would.
smaller population to have to keep happy. And I believe overall, they're probably much better off. I mean, the UAE has just exploded in the past 40 years, and there are so many benefits for locals to take advantage. Yeah, so like their sentiments are probably much
Financially
more
and
aligned.
economically, they are economically way better off
Yeah.
than Saudi population. So that's for sure. No,
But yeah, I
but
just wanted to bring that in. But yeah, go ahead.
no questions about the.
No, if not, I very much largely agree with everything that you're
Uh,
saying, really.
okay. So I just wanted to add this that historically speaking, and by historically speaking, I mean before World War One till like 3,000 years ago. It's quite interesting. You always have had this conflict between the what they call sometimes Khaliji states or Gulf states or Persian Gulf states, which are included even historically speaking some southern parts of Iran, Bahrain, UAE, Qatar region, Levant, Syria, Northern Arabia region, Iraq region, with the heartland Arabia in the desert. You always pretty much have had this fractious conflict between them. And historically speaking, besides very brief periods of time, very brief, like 100 years, let's say, you never had the Saudi Arabia heartland, the Arabian heartland, Hijaz, win or dominate or be the big power, the more powerful thing. So, for example, the most like probably powerful, the like in terms of hegemony of the uh, heartland of Arabia, we ever came was the first, what they're called the second, sorry, caliphate with Umayyad Caliphate, I believe, like with the Rashidun expansion, and then you had the Umayyad, and they were controlling like parts of Iran, parts of North Africa, well, all of Iran, I think, by the end of it and all that. So that only lasted about 100 years, and then you have like the whole like about 90% of the Arabic golden age and all of that is being administered by the Levant region, and you have the Khaliji region all throughout this medieval period, this ancient period, pretty much like breaking away, fighting. Like you have these Karamantians, you have all these things. They attack mainland because they trade with India. They have all these things. So you always have these fractions, and historically speaking, Northern Arabia or Levant or Iraq, that type of region, or the Khaliji region has had the upper hand, has dominated the Hijaz heartland region. So if I were a betting man and I was looking at the track record, I would say, and by the way, whenever like neither of them was in the power, they were dominated by like Ottomans. They would like that of thing. So if I were a betting man and we're looking at the historical trend, I would have bet that in the end, Saudis are going to lose this game, because there are too much fractions and all that. And because of the fact that, to be honest, like look at their situation with the Qatar. Like 2 years ago, they were talking about maybe building a canal to cut off Qatar from the Gulf. They were considering that project to just basically destroy Qatar completely. And now they're back because it was and their blockade didn't work and the international support wasn't there for them. It only helped Qatari relations to get a stronger with Turkey
Yeah.
and all that. So there is that. But at the same time, what the history I'm talking about, all of it is pretty much pre-industrial history.
Yeah.
So we never also had this level of investment and technological advancement in this region with the planned cities. I mean, some of the planned cities seem like fantasies and delusions.
I mean,
like
they certainly are.
I don't know, but
They certainly are, because
I
I
don't
mean,
know. UAE looks like a fantasy.
The region, exactly, both, all the countries. I mean, they show like, I think they propose like 10 and then they follow up on one. Like if you go look back, like one is built, one is like half built, and the other 8 they just forget. Like from that region, I've seen like exactly the craziest thing.
No. I would say back in the days, the ratio was like we dream up like 5, we make 4, and the ratio in Iran even was like that. But then increasingly, I would say, yeah, the ratio has gone increasingly in terms of like we dream 10, and then maybe 1 come,
which
like
is still enough. I mean, no need to.
Yeah,
No need
could be
to
good
dream
in
for
long
10.
term. Could be no, yeah. No, but yeah. So I like it's a game change because energy and all that. It's who knows like
Yeah.
what's gonna happen in the future. But yeah, historically speaking, it was quite interesting. It's like Syria. Like you think the Syrian civil war is such a new thing, but historically speaking, like it's been 3,000 years that 2 different groups like have been fighting over that specific piece of land under different guises. And,
I mean, historically, I'm just not as well versed as you to like, but I understand completely the point that you're making, the trend. I would just add that exactly like the UAE, the kind of player it is now, what it's doing in this current context is different than what it ever has done, which not strengthens it, it also makes it more susceptible. You know, something could go wrong and it could completely throw them back for
you could
for
have,
a
for
long
example,
time.
no, that's the thing though. Yeah, that's the thing about it's so weird. Like different systems have different weaknesses, and you can't compare them because you can have, for example, the revolution in Saudi Arabia. Saudi royal family moves to UAE, and then they have enough financial power to have a complete takeover. Like it's so weird. These type of things happen, and historically has happened a lot of things. And none of these royal families, by the way, are
other things
sort of,
like even recent ones, like the impact that the financial crisis had on the UAE. You know, all these things can damage because you know it is a peculiar. It is like a different. I mean, there are a lot of differences between UAE and other countries. That's
and every
every country
but,
for sure.
But I
yeah.
would say there is a lot of differences. We can say, in my view, UAE should be viewed more like a city state, Singapore. We should always differentiate between those type of states and big estates like Iran, Saudi, America. Even to be honest, America is a category of its own. Then you have Russia, China, and like maybe France, UK type thing. Then you have Iran.
No, I agree. But nice, good stuff. Very good stuff. Anything else that you want to add? Or
no. I hope it was a interesting video.
No, definitely. I mean, I very much enjoyed talking about it. So people, please like and subscribe. But more importantly, as always, please comment and leave your questions, criticisms, everything in the comment section below. We'll make sure to get to them.
Let us know if you like these type of videos on single issues or single relationships.
Well, okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in our next video. Thank you.